So this woman was at the time trying to be a mom blogger. She wasn't loving it, but she wanted to work from home. She has two special needs kids, and she got turned on to data, and she loves data. And she's like, I don't know how I'm going to make this work. And I'm like, I have no doubt that whatever you end up choosing, you are going to be fine. And so she's done pretty much everything with me. We did a one-on-one. I've worked with her and her husband. She has gone in 1 year. She did the work, no doubt. She is on track. She went from making 4 figures a month. In about a year's time now, she is on track to make 7 figures this year.
Wow.
And I mean that, and I'm like, it was a piece, but I had a piece in that. I kind of said, go, be you. Stop trying to be somebody else. Just be you and do your thing. And she's fully embraced it. And she's working like crazy. But yeah, and she's excited about her life. She's so pumped about her life. I've never been sorry that I've done this, because it just helps me widen how I can relate to people who sometimes don't relate well to anybody else, because I'm willing to understand them the way they want to be understood. And that feels really good.
Hi, folks. Welcome back to the Boom Vision podcast. I'm excited to have this week's guest, Karen Bemmes, who is a certified DiSC consultant. What is a DiSC personality profile? How does knowing thyself help you unlock your potential and strengthen your relationship with your spouse or business partner? You'll definitely want to tune in to hear what Karen has to share in this week's episode. Let's cue the intro. Welcome to the Boom Vision podcast. I'm your host, Benjamin Ye. This show is about how you can thrive. It's when you build success in alignment with your mind, body, and soul. I created this podcast to give you perspectives and frameworks on how to strengthen your mindset and gain clarity in your purpose. It's time for you to live an extraordinary life with vision that you design. Let's get to work. Rather than being your thoughts and emotions, be the awareness behind them. This quote was by Eckhart Tolle. Welcome to episode 30 of the Boom Vision podcast. Folks, I'm excited to share today's interview with Karen Bemmes. I've known Karen for almost a year now, when we started together in the same mastermind group in the SBI Pro community that we're a part of. In getting to know Karen and her passion of DiSC personality assessments, I just knew she would be a wonderful addition to our Boom Vision podcast to shed more light on self-awareness and awareness of the people around you. As a brief background, it was nearly 30 years ago when Karen Bemmes sat straight up in her bed while reading a book called Positive Personality Profiles. She looked at her husband and she said, I understand our sister-in-law for the first time in my life. You see, she never quite, quote-unquote, clicked with her sister-in-law, but learning about personalities changed that. Because of that book, she and her sister-in-law do click, and they've stayed close for the last 30 plus years. Since then, she has used what she's learned in that book to improve every area of her life. And now she helps others improve their personal and professional life while making it all feel simple, easy, and natural. You can learn about all the ways Karen can help you on her website, Moving Towards Better. So without further ado, here's Karen. Karen Bemmes, thank you so much for joining us in today's episode of Boom Vision.
I'm excited to be here.
Thank you so much for coming, Karen. And just for my audience to know, we've actually known each other now for, it's probably over 7-8 months now, right? We're members of the same mastermind group in SBI Pro. And I'm very grateful to have been part not only in the same group, but also getting to learn more about what you do and how you serve your clients. And one of the reasons why I asked you to join us for today's show is giving us a better glimpse of what it means to have an assessment within the DiSC profile, right? In terms of this personality test. And so I guess to just start off, love to hear your origin story, Karen. Can you tell us a little bit about your personal, professional background and how it came to what you do today?
Well, I've always been interested in communication. I was actually a communication major back in college, thought about going into psychology. The thought of 4 to 8 more years after undergrad kind of led me a different direction back then. But I was always interested in that and how people relate to other people. And when I was dating my husband, he was very close to one of his brothers. He's the baby of 9, and he was very close with this one particular brother who was married, and they did a lot of things together. So I wanted to really get to know that sister-in-law and be friends with her. And we had such a hard time connecting. And it's not that she disliked me or I disliked her. We just couldn't find that way to connect. And we were in an MLM at one time, and it was one of those where they hand you books all the time. And I was reading one of the books they handed me called Positive Personality Profiles. And I literally sat up in bed and I looked at my husband and I said, I understand her. For the first time, I get her. And I said, we have to go see them tomorrow. We just have to. So I went over there and I said, I'm going to relate to something that happened. And I said, please don't be upset with me. I'll explain when we're done. And I said, remember when I was at your house and we were standing and talking in her kitchen? And I said, your dryer went off and you walked downstairs. She, without a word, and left me standing right there in the kitchen. I said, do you remember that day? And she goes, oh yeah, I remember. And I said, when I was standing there, I thought, and I said, bear with me. I said, but I thought, how rude. Doesn't she see she has a guest? And I realized when reading this book that you were downstairs in the basement thinking, how rude. Doesn't she see I have work to do? And she said, exactly. And I was like, got it. And she's also a person who loves to work in her yard. And I said, so like when you're working in your yard and I drive by, you don't want me to stop and say hello, do you? And she's like, no, I don't. I said, so you're perfectly okay if I just honk the horn and wave? She goes, I prefer it. And so it was so exciting to understand her for the first time and to realize for me, I'm an extremely people-oriented person and she's an extremely task-oriented person. And that was part of why we couldn't connect, because I was trying to solve this issue as a people person and she's a task person. And once I realized how to respect her boundaries the way she needed them respected, without being less of who I am, we've been great friends ever since. And she's even said that to me a couple of times. She's like, I don't understand how we're friends. And I said, because I lift you up and you ground me and it works out beautifully. And she's like, yeah, you're right. We do. So, that was like my first huge epiphany of this stuff really is important in life.
Wow.
And that's how I kind of got started on learning about the personalities and how important they are.
Yeah, man, I'm getting the body chills because what I got from you, Karen, from that is to really establish authentic human connections. It's the feeling of being heard and being understood. And what I got from you is that before picking up that book, and I think you said it was Positive Personality Profiles, right? Before reading that book, we live in our own lens, through our own eyes. And when we feel like we want to be understood in a certain way, we might assume, well, I think that's how it works for everyone else, but that's not the case depending on their personality, depending on how they're wired. And having that aha moment of, wow, understanding not just how she wants to receive information, but also how she wants to be understood, allowed you to make that slight tweak and change, but made a world of difference in terms of how you can now relate and connect with her.
Right. And it was something just as simple as learning that when you're with a people-oriented person, you don't have to say, is this a good time to talk? Or is this a good time? When's a good time for me to stop by? They don't care. And so I didn't, but she did. If you interrupted her flow of work, it was really disorienting for her, and getting back into the flow was really difficult. And now that I know that, it's amazing how I can shoot her a text and say, hey, when you've got time, give me a call, or when you've got time, when would be a good time for me to stop by, or something like that. Rather than, I mean, we were practically neighbors. We lived less than a mile apart. So it was just easy to stop by, but I don't do that without some kind of acknowledgement that yes, it's a good time to come.
Yeah. So how long ago was that when you read that book and had that newfound exchange with your sister-in-law? Like how long ago was that? And then what happened from then on?
And that would have been right after my husband and I got married. So we've been married 29 years. So
Mm,
that was about that long ago. And so we've had to build on that. And I ask her, it's having the relationship we have now, I can ask her things.
yeah.
I can say, well, I look at this way. How do you look at this?
Mm,
And she'll tell me. And she knows that I'm truly asking for information, not to judge her, not to, for no negative reason at all. It literally is, I want to gather information. I want to understand this because it comes in handy everywhere.
got it. And so within the last 2 decades, like did you pivot to this path of, like when did disc profiles really come into the picture?
Well, it was kind of this progression. Like that was the first taste of it. And then I
Mm,
had my first child and I went, oh, I've never seen anything like this kid before. And this was a 2-year-old who literally looked at me one day and goes, I give you a deal. And I'm like, excuse me? You give me a deal? And so I was like, I'm going to go back to that book. and I actually went back to the book and I was like, oh, okay. Because of his personality type, which showed up very young in his life. Not all
mm,
kids do this, but his it was very clear what his dominant personality type is.
mm,
And I realized he needed more than either of my other two, which I found out later. He needed choices, he needed control. He really did. And when you've got a 2-year-old that needs control, that can be such a battle of wills.
mm.
And it became these really simple things that we figured out, that he hated to wait for me to put on his shoes. So we bought him Velcro shoes that he could put on himself. And I ended up getting yelled at by somebody at school because at 7 years old, he couldn't tie his own shoes yet. But I said, when she said that to me, I was like, but he's put his own shoes on since he was 18 months old and he's happy, so that's a battle I chose not to fight,
Mm.
and just things like that he was, I would lay out 2 outfits and I'd say, which one do you want to wear? Because if I just put one out, you could be guaranteed he's like, I don't want that. So
Mm.
when I had 2, he could pick the one, I took 2 appropriate ones and I'm like, pick whichever one you want. It was just those little things. Same thing with my marriage. I would go back to that book and I'd go back. And then when my youngest child got to be in high school, that's when I decided that I really want to do this for a living. I want to help other people understand people as much as I do. I want to, if they want to understand themselves and they want to understand other people, I want to be someone who helps them do that. And so I found out there was a certification I live in Cincinnati, Ohio. There was one in Louisville. It's just an hour and a half away. So I was all over it and I went ahead and did that. And then I got the advanced training as well. And the only training I don't have is to train other people to do this,
Mm.
to do what I do. But I've never been sorry that I've done this because it
Mm.
just helps me widen how I can relate to people who sometimes don't relate well to anybody else
Yeah.
because I'm willing to understand them the way they want to be understood. And that
Yeah.
feels really good.
I mean, chills when the last thing you just said, to understand them the way they want to be understood. That is so powerful, to not just having that self-awareness, but also that flexibility to be able to go there,
Mhm.
And so for my audience that might be new to DISC, can you explain a little bit, what is it? Like what is in the most simplest form, what is a DISC personality test?
What's really simple, and this is why I think I'm drawn to DISC, is I love the simplicity of it because we talk about people who are either outgoing or reserved. We don't say extroverted and introverted because it's really interesting. I have had people who are on that reserved side where they will literally look at me and go, I'm not an introvert. And I
Okay.
will say, but you're reserved. And they'll say, what do you mean by that? And I said, you're not the first one to talk because you want to gauge this person. And if you think that they're worth your time, then you're fully engaged. And so many people go, that's exactly how I am. And it's so fun to be able to do that, right? So that's the first way we have the outgoing versus the reserved. And then we also have task oriented and people oriented. So then you've got outgoing, task oriented, outgoing, people oriented, reserved, people oriented, and reserved and task oriented.
Got
So
it.
it's just a really simple way. Now, even though there's only 4, there are still 24,000 plotting points
Wow.
within that. So
Okay.
it's not like if you're this person, you're only this.
Hmm.
And I'll say that all the time when I'm in a one-on-one with somebody. I'll say, now I could be wrong, but looking at the where you are and looking at your charts and things like that, this is what I would suspect you feel like, or you prefer, or something like that. So it is very nuanced, I think. Plus, we've all got different experiences, That's one of the other things that we talk about a lot, is because this is an international group that we work with, and we've done international assessments with companies and things like that. And I had somebody who was like, he's like, I don't understand, because I think I'm reserved, but other people think I'm not. And I said, I'm going to say this and I will explain this. I said, it's because you're Italian. And I said, Italians in general are very warm. They're very open. They're very, and I said, among other Italians, you may seem reserved. And I have relatives who are Italian, and when they're all together, it's loud and it's raucous, and that's expected.
Hmm.
And so you being who you are in your culture, you are reserved. And I've had the same thing happen on the other side. This actually happened to a friend of mine, where the gentleman assessed outgoing and people oriented, and the guy kept saying, are you sure? Are you sure? And he finally said, look, I'm from the Middle East. He said, Americans are all crazy. They're all loud. They're outgoing. He's like, in my culture, I'm considered very outgoing. He's like, but you as a culture are just so much bigger, bolder, so sometimes you have to like check those nuances as well, as to what, you kind of check where they're from. That can shade things a bit. So that to me makes it infinitely interesting to talk
Hmm.
to people.
So over the years then, Karen, do you primarily work with individuals, executives, entrepreneurs? Is it companies, or is it a host of all the above?
It's a host of things, because sometimes because I'm in a group of other DiSC consultants,
Hmm.
they'll say, like one woman said, I have an international meeting. I need 10 people because we're
Hmm.
going to do breakout rooms. I need you guys to talk to people.
Gotcha.
So sometimes we do things together like that. And that was a Fortune 100 company and big international brand and all that. But then I also, one of my greatest loves is entrepreneurial couples.
Hmm.
I love entrepreneurial couples, particularly when it's female driven. And I say that in an absolute love of the fact that usually when it's it's usually husband and wife, a driven wife and a supportive husband. Because I always say, I think they're the 2 most misunderstood groups in the world,
Hmm.
because those driven women are seen as a word that usually starts with a B. And while they're very forceful, I find that they are fiercely loving as well, which
Hmm.
I absolutely adore about them. And then the same with the men. They're often seen as, I don't like the term and I don't use the term, but they're viewed as weak.
Hmm.
And I know for a fact from talking to all these men, it takes so much strength to be able to let the wife just shine and be
Hmm.
that true support, not
Hmm.
the guy who's standing behind, sniping behind her back or whatever. And I've seen these guys, and even some of them, I had one in particular where he kept saying they were opening a business together, and he was saying, I just need to be more outgoing, and I just need to be more outgoing. I'm like, no, you don't. And he's like, what do you mean? And he goes, how are we going to make sales? And I said, you're going to hire salespeople. You already have. I said, but you're that guy. They were opening a gym. And I said, you're that guy that's going to see that person standing off in the corner that's like really not sure whether they belong there or not. And you're going to walk over to them and you're going to say, it's a little overwhelming, isn't it? And they're going to be like, oh, he gets it. I said, so you're going to bring those people in. And you could just see like this light bulb go off that he's like, oh, I'm okay just how I am. And that to me is the most thrilling thing in the world. It was somebody gets that light bulb moment of, I'm okay just the way I am.
Yeah. Yeah, gosh, man, Karen, this reminds me of what I share on my show, which is mottos in our household. Embrace who you are, but embody who you want to become. When you can fully embrace all the pluses and minuses, just authentically who you are at that given moment, there's a sense of freedom in knowing that and being able to fully express that. But that doesn't mean that you should use that to stop you from who you want to embody, because you can always still grow, right? Professionally, personally, spiritually. And so hearing you say that really reminds me of that quote. And so this sort of leads to the next question too, Karen, which is that, is there any major breakthroughs, moments, or stories that your clients have experienced after you've given them a DiSC assessment?
One of my now really good friends in the online space, when I first met her, she's like, I always get this do me thing, right? And I'm like, well, I don't know exactly without an assessment. I prefer that you do that. And she has taken one since, but I have printouts that I can have people look at, and I'll say, are you more outgoing? Are you more reserved? Are you more task oriented? And I kind of picked the two task-oriented sides. I'm like, I'm not sure which one you are the most, but I'm guessing this one. I guessed her as the D, which is the outgoing and task-oriented.
Yeah.
And I said, but I'm guessing there's also some of this here too, which is the reserved and task-oriented. And she's like, yeah, pretty much. And I said, and there was another woman sitting there, and this is what I love about this. I looked at her, I said, you've been called the B word more than once in your life, and you don't really care. And she's like, no, I don't. And the other woman was like wide-eyed. And I said, look, I would never talk to you this way. But not only does she appreciate it, she will have no respect for me if I don't talk to her directly, if I'm not very direct with her. So this woman was at the time trying to be a mom blogger. She wasn't loving it, but she wanted to work from home. She has two special needs kids, and she got turned on to data, and she loves data. And she's like, I don't know how I'm going to make this work. And I'm like, I have no doubt that whatever you end up choosing, you're going to be fine. And so she's done pretty much everything with me. We did a one-on-one. I've worked with her and her husband. I'm now working with her in her business that she has gone in 1 year. She did the work, no doubt, but I opened the gate, kind of, and said, this is you, go be you, just do your thing and be okay with it. And so she will tell you, I'm direct, I'm foul mouthed, and but I'm really good at what I do. And she does data analysis, and she is on track. She went from making 4 figures a month in about a year's time. Now she is on track to make 7 figures this year.
Wow.
And I mean that, and I'm like, it was a piece, but I had a piece in that. I kind of said, go be you, stop trying to be somebody else, just be you and do your thing. And she's fully embraced it, and she's working like crazy, but yeah. And she's excited about her life. She's so pumped about her life.
She's loving it. Right.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely loving it. Who she is, what she's doing, the world that she's creating. She is so excited. And she's my number one, I talk about her all the time, but it's that kind of thing where you see them just open up and blossom into whatever it is they're supposed to be.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to tell anybody else to be like her, because she is an original and she's doing her original thing. And I absolutely love it.
That's awesome. Wow, Karen. It makes me wonder, when people do come to you for an assessment, what's been either the biggest roadblock or biggest misunderstanding they either had of themselves that after having a session with you, you help them uncover that? Is there a common one that sticks out of all the years that you've done this work? Is there a common either misconception or biggest roadblock someone might not be able to see themselves, but shedding that light, it's like, oh, from that perspective, oh, I didn't know that.
I think I would say two, because I do work with a lot of those high powered women, and they do struggle because society has a way that they think moms should be, even working
Mm,
moms should be. And one of my favorite conversations was with a client where I said, "You're not the kind of mom who's ever going to make hot chocolate and watch movies with your kids all afternoon." And she's like, "No, no, I'm not." And I said, "But having worked with your husband, he is." And she's like, "Yeah." And I said, "So let him be that, and you'll be the fun mom in another way. You don't have to fit into that box if it doesn't work for your family." And I said, "You've got this wonderful husband who likes doing those things. So let him. And then you're not pressured into it." I said, "Are you going to have to sit through a movie now and then with your kids? Probably, because they're going to ask you to. But it doesn't have to be something that's like part of your, like part of your everyday, where it's like daddy does story time and mommy takes you on a hike or something, whatever it happens to be." I find that to be a big thing for really high powered women, is just to have the permission to be that,
mm,
that they love their kids so much. They're not that warm, fuzzy, squishy mom, as I call it.
yeah.
But usually their husbands are the warm, squishy guys. So it's like, as long as the kids are getting what they need, everybody understands that. Who cares? So I get a lot of that. And I also work with a lot of bloggers, and a lot of bloggers tend to be very reserved,
Mm,
and they're so afraid to be seen. And we work on that. We work on that when you're very reserved and being seen, because the way we look at this is that you've attracted a certain audience. They're like you, and that's why they like you.
mm,
So putting yourself out there doesn't mean that all these people who are nothing, who don't want anything to do with your stuff, are going to come. What putting yourself out there is so that more people who need you, who are like you, can come into your circle.
right.
And that's a huge revelation for a lot of people. They're like, "Well, I never thought about it like that."
Yeah.
They're always worried about that. You're in the online space too. I mean, you're
Yeah.
always concerned about the trolls,
Right. Right.
because the trolls do come. But what I find is, until somebody's really big, you really don't have to worry about the trolls that much.
Mm,
And so when they've got their own little society there, very often when the trolls come, they don't even have to deal with them, because their people do. They're people like, "You need to leave. You need to go. You need to leave this person alone. They're helping other people," whatever it happens to be. I've seen it happen even on things like, it's bizarre where trolls pop up. There's a woman who's a recipe blogger, and I used to do some recipe blogging myself, and they're brutal. I mean, they're just brutal. The things they say about her, and her people come immediately to her defense. And I love it. They're like, "Leave. We don't need this here. This is just about recipes and a really nice woman who makes nice recipes for us. Go elsewhere." And
yeah.
she actually had a viral video because someone was so rude about how she looked, and she addressed it, because she actually has a medical condition that makes her look older than she is. She's prematurely graying, and she's
Mm,
got some other things going on. And she's like, "I'm going to explain to you why I look the way I look." And she did. And I thought, that was really sweet of her to do that. But how sad that it became necessary for her
yeah.
to do it. So anyway, which is why I think people do have a concern about being seen. But again, when you've got the right people around you, they come to your defense before you even have to. So
Yeah.
it's a really cool thing for them to understand that that's what they're creating. It's really a safe space for people just like them.
Yeah. No, that's a really a good point, Karen, because being in a content creation world, yeah, there is that initial fear or emotions of being public, being in in the public eye or being under the spotlight. And so, yeah, definitely touch a nerve on me when you were saying that, because, I don't know, my audience knows, you know this because you're in my mastermind group, but when I started my podcast, it started really a half a year later than it would have been, just because when I recorded my first episode and I listened back on the playback as I was editing, I was like, that's how my voice sounds like? Oh my God, who in the world would want to listen to me, right? No. And I literally shelved it for half a year because I was like, no one would want to listen to me. And it wasn't until, my wife was taking this nutrition course, and one of the instructors had this quote, which was, when you're nervous, focus on service. And when she shared that with me, it hit a nerve for me, because it's like, wow, if I make how my voice sounds weird to my own ears, if I make that the priority that's stopping me from really sharing or starting this podcast, then I make it about me. Then it's not, and now it's not my intention. My intention was because I just wish my younger self had something like this so that I can process those times when I feel stuck. And literally, when I really got that new perspective, that same weekend, I already recorded episode 2 and 3, and I got back on track, right? And so what you shared, it really resonates, because yeah, there is that, whether you want to call it imposter syndrome, whether you want to call it just fear of the spotlight, whatever it is, I mean, I love to hear more. So in that instance, or maybe in other instances with your clients, what are some advice you're able to share for people that might be going through that, to help them see in a different light, to see in a different perspective?
My absolute favorite in that regard, and I see this in every personality type. So that's, there are some things that are universal. It doesn't matter how driven you are. There is this momentary, now you may step into it eventually where you really know, this is exactly what I'm supposed to be doing, this is where I'm supposed to be. But everybody has that imposter syndrome at some point. Sometimes you're doing really well, and then something happens, one of those trolls or somebody that, you used to be aligned with and you're not aligned with anymore, comes back at you. And, I've seen it happen so many times. But again, you're not, and I've told people this too, especially the reserved people. I think they are much more concerned with it. You're not for everyone. And that's okay.
Hmm.
What's not okay is when they don't scroll on by. And then sometimes you have to deal with that bit of trolls or ugliness or whatever. But you attract people for a certain reason. And that's fine. And I say that all the time, that's why I think those driven women are drawn to me, because I look at them and I'm like, you are freaking awesome. And usually people are saying to them, you are freaking annoying. It's a different, it's seeing them, it's seeing the best in them.
Yeah.
And it's a big deal, when somebody sees you sometimes clearer than you see yourself.
Yeah.
And I think that's what the assessment does, is it helps you just kind of distill who you really are. And there's this one piece of the assessment, and I always say it's my favorite, it's one of my favorite things. It's how you can be misunderstood by other people. And that varies depending on, what your personality type is. But it's amazing to me how many people will look at that and they just sit and they look at it for the longest time. And two things usually happen. One is I say, when you are out of balance, and that's what I use, in balance and out of balance. When you are out of balance, this is how people can misunderstand or misperceive you, that you are this way. And it could be you're stubborn, you're flighty, you're resistant, you're, whatever. And it's really interesting to watch them look at that and go, yeah, I can be that way. Or I can see how they see me that way. And then I say, that doesn't mean that's who you are. It just means that can be how you're perceived, or that you're in this temporary situation. It doesn't mean you're a stubborn person. It means when you get backed into a corner, when you're talking to fight or flight, you dig your heels in and you're going to fight, and they go, okay, I get that.
Mm.
or you're being unreasonable. Well, are you or are they? And it's just kind of who you've been around. And I love that piece because everybody seems to get clarity on themselves in that little piece of the assessment.
Yeah.
That, oh, I can be that way. Oh, that's why that person treats me like that, because they think I'm being that way, or,
Yeah.
it's both of those things sometimes. I love it. I love that piece of it.
I can really see the benefit of that, Karen. For example, whether it's those couples that are in business together, whether it's your personal family relationship, whether it's your co-founders in teams. Just, there's times when something hits the fan, it's like, okay, what part of the fight and flight do you really lean towards on based on your personality? And if you understand your other partner has that tendency, well, now you have a more of an awareness of why they act the way they do, but also just to be conscious of, okay, then what can you do to best support them and each other?
That has flat out saved my marriage more than once,
Mm,
because I lean in, my husband leans back.
mm,
I'm outgoing, he's reserved. He needs to step back, he needs to think. Our first, before I ever did DiSC, our first disagreement, good disagreement. And we honestly, we've been married, like I said, 29 years. I used to say I could count on one hand. It's probably one and a half now, but we don't fight. We just don't. Neither one of us likes conflict. So we tend to talk things out, but we had this moment and we were disagreeing and we were kind of at an impasse. And so for me, the way I work that out is I actually get up and I move. These are the kind of women who can go into rage cleaning if it's, if you've heard that term, but it's literally how you work out in your head. You need to be moving at the same time.
mm.
He slows way down when he's in conflict, where I speed way up. And so he was following me around as I'm cleaning the house. And I finally turned around, and how I hate to admit it, but I turned around and I went, "What?" And he was like, "What?" And I was like, "What do you want?" And he was like, "Nothing." And I said, "Then help or get out of the way." And he went, "Fine." And he went downstairs and he read a book for 2 hours. And I'm upstairs, like in my head thinking, how could you be reading a book right now? Now that we have this information, I will look at him and say, I have to move, and it's better if you're not around,
Mm.
unless we're talking this through.
Yeah.
And he'll say, okay, then I'm going to go read a book. So we have enough of that communication now. Or if he's stressed, I will say, do you need some time alone to process whatever it is you're thinking about? And then he makes that choice. Yes, I do need some time alone. Or it has nothing to do with you. Sometimes it's work. And I'm like, are you upset with me? And he's like, no, I got this thing from work. And I'm like, do you want to talk about it? Do you want to sit back? It's those skills that you get, that you're not always angry at each other or not understanding why is she being so mean? Why is he being so stubborn? What, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
It's like magic. It's like magic in a relationship to understand, that when they back off, it's not that they don't care. It's that they care so much. The last thing they want to do is say something that's going to hurt your feelings.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh, that's why they're doing that.
Yeah.
It's mind blowing. The first time I heard that, it was mind blowing to me.
Right.
Because I came from a family with a lot of arguing, and I never realized that backing off could actually be a gift of love. And then you
Mm.
find out that it was, and it was like, wow, that's amazing. Where it's also, when we had smaller children, it was a gift of love for me to say, I need to go take a walk. I need to talk this through in my own head. Can you watch the kids for me? And he would be like, fine, go do what you need to do. And it's just that lovely, I wouldn't even call it a give and take, just that lovely, it's more like a yin and yang
Yeah.
than a give and take. You know what I mean? Where you're
Yeah.
just kind of moving along together, as opposed to a push and pull kind of thing.
Yeah. No, I totally get it, because I think early on for my wife and I, in a similar vein, we both taken this course called Landmark Education, which was, a lot of like self-development kind of inner work. And And in one of the courses, I think it was the communication courses, it was just things where, yeah, when we get into fights, like it was like very explosive, right, to put it mildly. And the one thing that allowed us to work through when situations arise is this ability to acknowledge and identify, okay, right now the other person is just not in the space, whether it's mental, physical, to be able to process, because anything we say will, it's almost like adding fuel to the fire. So we have this word where it's like, hey, I need a timeout. And when they say it, we mean it. It's not because we're, because depending on personality, some people are like, no, we need to talk it out. We need to work it out tonight, right? Like we need to figure it out now. Some people have that gear in them that that's how they operate. But other people is like, wait, I need time. I need time out. I need to process myself. And so anytime a person says that, it's because they recognize, okay, right now in this state of mind, I'm just not going to be able to process. And I'd rather not continue the conversation because I don't want to say something I'm going to regret.
Mhm.
So let's do timeout. I mean, cool off for an hour, whatever it is, and then we can come back to it. Or if we want to do it next day, we can. But we give them permission and ask, when would you like to re-engage the conversation then, and be able to be respectful of that. And so when you were sharing with that, it really reminds me, because having that technique really, again, saved my marriage, right? Because
Mhm.
it's like, there's times
Exactly.
where it's just,
Yeah.
wow. Anytime there's fights, it's just explosive because we were in our own heads and not being aware, at least, of what other person, how they want to process or work things at the speed that makes sense for them.
And you're not in the mode not just to understand it, but to work it through that way, where it's
Yeah.
like, okay, and that timeout. And what's interesting about that is like I said, I'm that lean in person. Let's talk it through. Let's do that. Let's, I lean in, and my husband, he will lean back forever. Where I want it done now, he'll lean back forever. So what you said about that, setting a time of when are we going to come back and
Right.
revisit that,
Yeah.
that's a middle ground important
Yeah.
piece
Yeah.
where you're like, I don't need it done immediately and you can't wait forever.
Right.
So let's pick a time, when are we going to put a fork in it and say, okay, we're going to talk about this now.
Yeah.
So I think that's a huge piece of it. And that's that compromise that nobody's giving away too much of themselves, where you're like, okay, are we going to talk about this today? Are we going to talk about it tomorrow? How much time do you need to process? Because, I'm all over it right now.
Right.
And he's like, nope. So it's like, okay, let's talk about this after dinner or whatever,
Yeah.
or we'll go take a walk after dinner and we'll hash it through or something
Yeah.
like that. So,
Beautiful. So, Karen, you mentioned a book before, Positive Personality Profiles. Is there a book in the last several years that you've read, whether it's personality related or not, that has been very impactful for you that you would recommend for our audience?
ooh, there are so many, I'll tell you. If you're into the woo part of life, there is one called Outrageous Openness, and it's not even really a personality kind of book. It suits my personality, I guess, because I'm a person who, like I said, I love all religions. I think there's so much to be learned from all different traditions. And I think that's what I love about this book is this woman is um, she's just different, and she's was raised Jewish, graduated from Yale, um, fell in love with the Indian tradition. So she loves Kali, but yet she loves Jesus and she loves Muhammad, and she's just this really open person to spirituality in general. And her name is Tosha Silver. It's Tosha Silver, and she's just, it is outrageous, and it does kind of open you up to a whole new way of thinking about life. And the positive personality profiles, they've changed it, but it's who do you think you are anyway. That's the old version is no longer in print, but
Mm.
now he's got this book, Who Do You Think You Are Anyway? And it goes through the same type of thing. It goes through the same type of process
Ah.
that positive personality profiles did.
And what's the author's name for that new book?
It's Robert Rohm, Rohm.
Got it. Okay, and I'll include that in the show notes so that people can access to both of them because I think whether you're in the left side of the left brain or you're more on the woo side and or the right brain or somewhere in the middle, right? There's always something for everyone. Karen, one question I always ask my guests is if the DeLorean was a real thing in Back to the Future and you can travel back in time, what would be the one thing you would tell yourself if you have the ability to travel back 10 years ago to share your younger self?
As far as my career, I'd say get certified earlier and start doing this
Okay.
quicker because that would be that.
Yeah.
Um, the other thing is that as someone who got into the online space, I'm older than a lot of people that I work with. Like a lot of my friends are not much older than my oldest child.
Mm,
So, um, but it's that it's never too late. It's never
mm,
too late to be everything you're supposed to be. I was supposed to be a mom for those years that I was raising kids. Now I'm doing this and I'm supposed to be this too.
yeah.
We get this idea of we're supposed to be in this progression. And I'm watching people who worked all those years outside the home where I worked inside my home. I have a special needs child. And now I feel like I'm just getting started in my 50s where so many people are finishing up. And I'm like, who cares?
Yeah.
Just be
Yeah.
who you are meant to be and
Mm,
embrace it fully. And life gets really fun when you do that.
yeah. 100% Karen. I love that. I love that. And the audience doesn't know this, but I always ask the question before I start an interview with my guests, or if I'm a guest on someone else's show, which is what's your intention you want to set for today's interview? And when you share that your intention is the audience in listening to this interview, that someone finds peace for who they are. And what you just shared right now really, I feel, resonates with that intention, truly, because at the end of the day, whether it's this, whether it's another modality, right? We had a previous guest on that it did human design. There's so many different flavors of it. There's no one way. It's just whatever way that resonates with you. It's whether who you're working with resonates with you.
Mm-hmm.
And
Absolutely. Absolutely.
yeah,
I say that all the time, because there are other assessments out there and most of them are good. Not all of them, but most of them are good.
yeah,
So many of us, how many of us in college did the Myers-Briggs, right? We
right,
all we
right.
all did that back in the day. And I could never, my problem was I wasn't a 4, I was a 5 because I got to be a little different. Instead of being I think I'm in an ENFTP. So, I'm like ENFTP. Okay.
Yeah,
So, and people are like, wait a minute, there's only 4. And I'm like, yeah, apparently I have 5. So,
yeah,
but, and it's good. But for me, that told me about me. What I love about DiSC for me is that it not only helps me understand myself, but it helps me understand other people too.
yeah.
And that's huge.
Awesome, awesome. So, last question, Karen. Where can our listeners find you?
The easiest place to start is my website, which is Moving Toward Better.
Hmm.
So movingtowardbetter.com. From there, you can get an assessment. There's links right there at the top of the pages where you can get an assessment. You can sign up to have a one-on-one with me. I have a retreat coming up in September that you can get more information on. And I am also on Facebook as Moving Toward Better. I'm on Instagram as Moving Toward Better. I'm on Pinterest as Moving Toward Better. And I'm not really active on Twitter, but I'm there, and that's Move
Okay,
Toward Better. So MOV Toward Better.
gotcha.
So I'm kind of everywhere, but you'll find me most active on Instagram and Facebook.
Okay, perfect. And now, and as I mentioned before, I'll definitely include that in the show notes. But before I lay you off too easily, you mentioned about the retreat. Let's talk a little bit more about that, Karen. What
Ooh,
is a retreat about? When is it exactly? We discussed this in our mastermind group, so I'm helping to shed more light in the beauty that you do. And so I'd love for our audience to understand what is your retreat about?
the retreat is we're going to take all of that information and we're going to go deep dive into it and to say, all right, where are the parts of your life that you struggle most?
Hmm.
And how are we going to show you how to take who you are naturally and make that work for you, not against you. And
Mm.
where do you need help? Where do you excel? How can, let's talk about your partner, because one of my favorite things about the mix of personalities is most of us are a blend of more than one. Some of
Mm.
us are just D, I, S, or C, but most of us are blends.
Right.
And we tend to marry someone that we share a personality trait with. But that means if we're blends, we have opposite personality traits.
Mm.
So again, like I said, that's that lean in, lean out thing. So
Yeah.
it all works great until there's conflict.
Right.
And when you understand it, it works out wonderfully. You can work with your differences through that. But if you don't know, you just say, well, he's being a stubborn jerk, or she's just gets flighty and doesn't do anything, or she just sits there and she shuts down, or whatever it happens to be, that you think in your head, whether you say it or not. But we'll work through all those little pieces. And what's really cool is what works for your business is also going to work at home. It's going
Mm.
to work with your kids. It's amazing how the dominoes all, they all fall. When one falls, they all fall. And you're like, oh, there's that beautiful picture I've always wanted of my life.
Yeah. Got it. Now, is this a in-person retreat? Is it one day? Is it a whole weekend or?
Currently, it's an in-person. I'm thinking about adding a virtual component to it, but it is currently in Cincinnati, and can't remember the exact dates right now, but it is the third weekend of September, whatever that happens to be.
Got it. But they can sign up on through your website that you gave
Yep,
earlier, right? Perfect.
there's September retreat right there at the top of the homepage, and you can click there, and it just gives you more information. It'll go through a lot of what we'll be working on that weekend. So
Okay. Fantastic. So, Karen, before we sign off, is there a question you wish I would have asked you?
not that I can think of. We've pretty much gone through most of it, and I really just I just encourage everybody to do this, because it was life changing for me. It was
Yeah.
life changing for me to see who I am. And possibly the one thing is what I found out that's the most important, and you wouldn't have even known how to ask this question, is that we have something called a team chart, and we can do it for a family, we can do it for a company. And when we did the team chart, I have 3 children. I call her my daughter in love, and I have a future daughter in love.
Mm.
And I had them all take the assessments, and we populated the team chart. And for those of you who've watched Sesame Street, there's a song on there from when we were children. I don't know if they still do it, but it was, one of these things is not like the others. I'm the one of the things that was not like the others, because everyone in my family is in that bottom part of the circle that's reserved. And here I am in the upper quadrant all by myself. And it just helps me to understand, learning that way back in the day,
Yeah.
that, I'm a super happy morning person. So I'm like, hello. And my family's like, oh God. So they're not morning
Yeah.
people. They're very reserved. So I learned to tone myself down, not change who I am. But in
Mm.
the mornings, I toned myself down. They were much better with it in the afternoon when they were a little more awake. But,
Mm.
it's just those little things that you learn that just make life better.
Yeah. I really feel that. I do. Karen, thank you so much for joining me today on our show. I want to just acknowledge that getting to know you, you've got this warm, glowing light, and I would love for the world to see more of it. So when Karen does say, hey, just take that step in getting to know more about yourself, right? I mean, I say this often where as coaches or, as entrepreneurs, as a father, not impossible, but it's difficult to read your own label when you're inside your own jar. And when you have someone able to shed more light on what your label is on your jar, but not only that, working with someone that you can trust, it makes a world of difference. So that's all to say that, yeah, if you're compelled and drawn to wanting to know more and having more awareness of yourself and how you are with your partnerships, whether it's personal or business, reach out to Karen, because I could definitely vouch for her for sure.
I appreciate that, Ben. That's a lovely thing to say. And thank you so much for having me. I really, really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you, Karen.
Thanks.
Folks, I hope you all enjoyed today's interview with Karen. The main takeaway I got from today's interview reminds me of a Stephen R. Covey quote, and that is, every human being has 4 endowments: self-awareness, conscience, independent will, and creative imagination. These give us the ultimate human freedom, the power to choose, to respond, to change. What I appreciate about today's interview is that something like a DiSC personality assessment can bring more self-awareness to who I am, how I'm wired, and how I like to be understood. And when you combine that to being curious and conscious of the people around you and how they want to be understood, that can truly help give you that sense of freedom and power to choose, respond, and change. If you enjoyed today's interview, please share this episode with your loved ones, business partners, or teammates that can truly benefit. If this is your first time listening in, I appreciate you joining us today. I invite you to hit that subscribe button so that we can thrive together with a stronger mind, body, and soul. Until next time, folks, be kind to yourself. Be in the light. Be you. Thank you so much for tuning in to my Boom Vision podcast. If you'd like to find out more about me and this podcast, head over to benjaminyeh.com. That's spelled BenjaminYeh.com. If you haven't already, click subscribe, and I'll catch you next time.